Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, this is Janice O'Leary for Healing Hearts and Minds and My Life. Today we will be talking to Lori Gertz, author of When Mama Can't Kiss It Better. And I believe I have Lori on hold. I'm having trouble with my switchboard this morning, so that's what's going on.
Janice?
Hello, Lori. Are you there?
Hi, I am.
Sorry about all that. My goodness, we've been having trouble connecting, and then the switchboard was acting up. Oh, good. I'm glad I finally got you here.
You too. Hold on one second. Let me just get myself situated here.
Yeah, no problem. We're just going to be talking to Lori about her book, My Mama Can't Kiss It Better. And so is everything good on your side?
Everything is good on my side.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Lori, can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write your book?
That's an interesting question. I would say the book sort of wrote itself. The book is a culmination of some real catharsis on my part, because much of what was going on in my life at the time felt so unbelievable to me that I needed to take the time and write down what was happening. And the original draft of the book is really very much a timeline, a real I would say, significant piece of academic and clinical information, and it's probably the reason why I went through so many queries to be able to finally get some interest on it, because I really needed to, I hate to say water it down some, but it was really a very cathartic piece in which I really processed all of the material and information that I learned through my journey with this child.
So our listeners some of them may be aware of your story and everything that it's about, but can you fill them in? Maybe just explain to us about Ellie and your family and how all of that came to be.
Well, like many people who'd had an early career, I didn't get married until my mid-30s, and was pretty much told by a few doctors that I better get to it if I wanted to have children. And the first child that I had biologically, there were no difficulties. There was no sign on the horizon that there was going to be any issue. And then that whole fundamental understanding about having children and biological children being easy and all that sort of flew into the wind as I got a little bit older. And by the time I was, I want to say about 40 or 38, we started to try again. And I think I had my first child at about 36. And there was difficulty, a tremendous amount of difficulty. So my husband had been adopted, and we had always discussed it as one of the possibilities. And so we started to look into adoption. And initially, because my husband had been adopted domestically and his philosophy was based on some really personal experience, we decided to go international. And we were in the midst of an international adoption with a child in Guatemala just about when they halted everything in Guatemala, because some of the scenarios that were going on there were not kosher. And just about the same time we were in the middle of that, we found ourselves in a relationship with a facilitator who's kind of like a matchmaker between birth mothers and prospective adoptive families in that triad. And she had access to a lot of birth mothers who were looking for adoptive parents, and or the other half of their triad. And so through that, we were matched with a birth mom in New Jersey, And we went through the whole process as our hands were held through that process with attorneys and a facilitator and an agency. And the way it was all sort of pieced together could not happen anymore, at least not in the state of Illinois, because of the way it was pieced together. It wasn't because we purposely did that. It was just the way all the pieces fell into place for us. And so one of the big pieces that was missing, and we didn't realize it because we had no experience other than my husband having been adopted, and most people don't, but the huge piece that was missing in our adoption picture was the social work piece. Although, we had been looked at under a fine crystal to the point where, things that my husband had done in his 20s were coming up in some of the background checks and all, silly little college kinds of things. And but nobody really looked into the birth mother to confirm that any of the story was right on in terms of a social work piece. So while, we paid all these attorneys to do all these background checks and all the rest of that, a lot of it fell through the cracks. And the reason it fell through the cracks was because our birth mother had a pretty unclean record and was not a healthy person. And yet she had some support on her end from her brother. And so the two of them managed to hack some files and change some medical information and really sort of whitewash her history. So none of the people that we hired found anything, and everything looked wonderful. And so an adoption happened. I was there for my daughter's birth. I was actually her coach until she couldn't go any further. And she had some medical complications, not my daughter, but birth mom. And so in the end, she ended up coming out by cesarean. And at birth, she really, looking back now, if you look at all of Anne Streiskuth's research from the early 1970s, my daughter was born with nearly every single symptom or clue that she had been exposed in utero to drugs and alcohol. But nobody caught it. And I say in my book, I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's sort of a theme throughout the course of my experience. I didn't know what I didn't know about adoption, about the process of adoption. I didn't know what I didn't know about what to look for in a child when they're born, when the story it seems to be supported by truthful information. So as I began to get to know this baby who never really ever reciprocated in the way that my biological children have, and what I mean by that is that initial nurturing instills a bond between mom and baby, and it's kind of like you begin to pour your connection, your love, your attachment into this other person as you care for them and nurture them through these first moments of their lives, the first months, the first years. And it begins to portray itself as a real reciprocal relationship. You look at the child with love, and the child looks back at you with love, and that brightness in their eye and that connection, that recognition. The child will cry out. You walk into the room, the child sees you and is immediately soothed. But that was never the case with my daughter. And so, and I just kept trying. And again, I didn't know what I didn't know. So, our relationship is really built on a really, I want to say, a shaky foundation where the attachment never formed. And that's something called reactive attachment disorder. And, or it really can become quite reactive. And in that, there's quite a bit of rage and anger towards mom. And a lot of the therapists have explained to me that a lot of that anger and rage towards mom is really, it's misplaced mom. it's birth mom, and it's that I guess it sort of results as a part of the child feeling they were ripped away or torn away from that person, that their birth parent, their biological parent. And here I was pouring in everything I had, and there was no reciprocation. On top of everything else, it took 3 years, but we got the diagnosis after we learned that all of those records had been hacked, and our premise of truth for our daughter's in utero experience was fiction. We brought her finally to a specialist. He was the 39th doctor, who in under 5 minutes diagnosed her with something called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is brain damage and neurological damage, real organic stuff caused by the teratogen alcohol, which stops growth of the embryo as it crosses the placenta. So any alcohol that's imbibed can cause this sort of damage in utero. And the letter that we received, we call it the Don't Shoot the Messenger email, because that was how it was received. That was the title of it. And, described the use of everything from PCP to LSD to OxyContin to crack cocaine and heroin. And alcohol was so benign it wasn't even mentioned. So this is the crock pot that my child was ladled from, as I say, and so the damage, the behavioral and the lack of attachment and the behavioral damage that was done by virtue of a lot of this neurological stuff was really how it became very clear that my daughter was born with this legacy that was going to be a struggle for her whole life. And so, a little bit about our story is that the Mama Can't Kiss It Better is I guess it's my journey through coming to an understanding, though being a very A-driven solutions type person, that this is her journey, and I was alongside of her for a long time, and quite a bit of it, and my experience as her sidekick on this journey is really how this book evolved.
That's amazing. Just all the difficulties that she's encountered. Did you find after Ellie's diagnosis that you and your husband had significant support in your community to help with raising Ellie?
I wish.
Or any.
No. It's funny. It's not funny, but at the time it was kind of ironic, because for 3 years I took her to specialist after specialist saying, I happen to be a biological mother. It has absolutely nothing to do with this, because all of my children are my children, but I don't understand this behavior. And I'm giving to this little girl everything I've given all my other children, but their childhood is so different. I don't understand. And so in the long run, I had fingers pointed at me for years, and I was beginning to internalize this fault, the fault of why is this parenting experience so different, and why is my child not bonding to me the way the other children did, and is this something I'm doing? And of course, I had specialists tell me, oh, it's a perfect bond, everything is good, look at the way she's looking at you, and everything is great, but everything was not great. I couldn't soothe this child for my life. And so I would continue to go to these specialists, and we had sleep studies done, and I took her to neurologists and special types of pediatricians and occupational therapists. She was hospitalized a few times for her skin issues. She was seen by gastroenterologists. She was seen by some of the top doctors in all of the Midwest. And yet it wasn't until this 39th doctor, this person who specializes in diagnosing and in understanding the effects of exposure to drugs and alcohol during pregnancy, that I was finally, I hate to use the word, my feelings were validated. It wasn't that I needed to point a finger at something that had happened, but I needed to take the finger away from pointing at myself. And once I was able to do that, a lot of the emotion hit. So there was a period of time after the diagnosis where I just, I'm really strong. I can do this. If anybody can fix this, I can do this, and we can do this, and we have the financial ability to be able to do this. My husband has a nice job, and at the time I was running a pretty successful business. And we just felt very confident about it once the finger was moved from pointing at myself. So at that point, I really started to reach out into the community, specifically the school system, and trying to get her an early, educational package, an individualized educational package. And the first time that she was assessed, it was earlier than I was able to get her early intervention. And that was the only time prior to her being 3 years old. So I had maybe 6 or 8 months of services from the early intervention program where they came to our home and assessed her and came up with all sorts of assessment, like sensory processing and this, that, and the next thing. That helped. And then, I have to back up a little bit because I'm remembering the early intervention actually came before the diagnosis. The diagnosis came just as she was about 3. And I felt like we had hit the jackpot. Now that we had the diagnosis, we could then take it to the school system and get an IEP for her, an individualized education plan. But that wasn't the case. For all these years I'd taken her to all these specialists and tried to get people to give us names, labels that went along with this behavior, this really unusual behavior that included, some real violent raging and some really disarming sorts of outbursts, and nobody cared. We brought FASD to the table, and no one knew what it was, and no one cared. And the interesting thing that I realized was that had it been a traumatic brain injury from, say, some other form of hydroencephalitis or some other a fall down the stairs, we would have had services thrown at us left, right, and center. But because of the way she received this traumatic brain injury and the fact that fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is not on the DSM-4, nobody recognizes it. And so we got nothing. We got a diagnosis that no parent in their right mind ever wants to hear because it's completely incurable. It is brain damage. And we got no support from the community whatsoever. So we had to go private, and we utilized our insurance until the insurance started bucking everything. And so that was pretty much what we did. And then after years and years of trying standard kinds of therapies, and I say standard for sensory processing and the various, I want to say we were kind of treating the symptoms at that point because there is no treatment for FASD. It's just you're trying to manage the behavior that's associated with it. And then the waters were muddied because as every year progressed and her associated mental illness, I want to say, deteriorated, there'd be new symptoms and new, forms of therapies that we could try, to the point where we started to use psychotropics, which is something we avoided for a number of years. But support in the community, no, not so much.
Yeah, that was kind of a leading question.
I know it was. There was a lot of staring in the grocery store. We had a lot of teachers' aides ask our au pair at the time if Ellie was loved by her parents. I mean, we had a lot of vicarious, thrill-seeking, people on the side who thought, who knows what they thought. I'm sure they thought we were the worst parents on the face of the earth, but we were those parents. There's a whole chapter about being those parents, the one that takes a screaming child out on your shoulder from not only the toy aisle at Walmart, but from pretty much every place you go. So must be those terrible parents.
I think that it's, how you say you didn't know what you didn't know. I think that's the main crux of the problem, is that there is very little education about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I have a stepdaughter with the same thing, and it's so hard to explain to people. They'll see us walk in somewhere together, and they'll be like, "Oh, she's so lovely," but all of the behaviors happen at home, not in public for her. She's not in public she's very quiet and laid back, but when she gets home, that's when her rages hit, and it's just very difficult to try and get people to understand that it's not anything that we're doing to her or not doing to her. It's just that's the way her brain works. It's very, very frustrating. I think that there's a lot more public awareness that needs to be put forth regarding this.
Well, and in the educational environment specifically, because one of the main traits of a child or of anybody with a legacy of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder are a couple pretty important elements to learning, and those are learned behavior. There are blips of learned behavior abilities where they can pick up a skill and know it one day and know it for years, and then turn around and not know it anymore. And it's clear organic brain injury. It's just a very clear symptom or affect of experiencing brain damage or being somebody who has experienced brain damage. And yet, in an educational environment, if they get 100 on their spelling, everything's fine. And if they don't remember how to spell it a week later or 2 months later or a year and a half later, it's oppositional. We know they know how to do that. They're being oppositional. Mm-hmm. So the lack of understanding of how the brain actually is affected and how the brain's process is affected by a traumatic brain injury like fetal alcohol spectrum or fetal alcohol effects or any of the spectrum disorders on that line of, well, how much did mom drink and when did mom drink and that sort of thing. The school system just doesn't get it. So other things that are missing are an understanding of abstract or time and money. So while somebody with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can sort of fake their way through high school, especially if they've got a behavioral intervention program, because that's often what happens. The school labels them a behavioral issue. It's oppositional. There's defiance, and it's premeditated because they don't understand that it's brain damage because the child looks fine and can act fine for a percentage of the time. And when I say fine, I mean they fall in the norm of how they want to see children acting at that age in that environment. So they can fake their way. And then, they get out of school and they can't work, they can't hold a job. They have no understanding of time and money and, in most cases, the consequences of their behaviors. So, it's so much responsibility of the awareness piece of this is in the educational environment. But then I go back and say, but so much is also a part of the medical environment. Why did it take 39 specialists for me to find somebody who could diagnose my daughter in 5 minutes? I mean, people told me I had Munchausen's. I was pointed at, and it was all my fault, many, many times. And yet in 5 minutes, somebody looked at my daughter's face, and because her philtrum was a particular way, that's the line between the nose and the lip, and her eyes had certain features, and her palate inside of her mouth was a specific way, and her hearing was affected in a particular way, and the way she answered the questions. 5 minutes. And we've got the diagnosis that makes us, want to cry for the rest of our lives. But so the awareness piece is huge, and then the educational piece is huge. And as parents of these kids, this is our job because nobody else is talking about it. The other thing, of course, as you know, is it's very controversial to say when doctors don't even say you shouldn't drink. I don't know about your doctor, but when I was pregnant with my firstborn, at the end I was a little stressed out, and he told me to go home and have a glass of wine.
Yeah, you hear that very often, and I think when people don't live it, if you don't live through this or see or know somebody who's living through it, it's very difficult to understand because we all want to think the best of our birth parents and feel that they've done a good job and everything's fine. And I think the general public's not ready to understand it because it's too scary, really, to think that one glass of wine can change your child's brain.
It is scary. It is. I think the underlying issue is really that a mom, a birth mom, if she's doing this during pregnancy, there's a bigger issue. And ironically, or not ironically, but our doctor that day, he told us about the FASD and we got the diagnosis. He stayed away from telling us that 90% of children with this diagnosis, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, struggle with comorbidities, some pretty serious comorbidities, and my daughter has them. And the reason for that is, why is birth mom self-medicating during a time when her body is responsible for growing another being? Because she's struggling with her own issues. And the possibilities and the plausibility of that birth mom having some serious mental illness at the time, that they're self-medicating. If somebody can give up alcohol during pregnancy, they usually do. It's, people give up sushi, they give up coffee because they can.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're reliant on however you're medicating yourself, OxyContin or alcohol or crack, whatever it is, then if you can give it up, you will. But if you can't, you won't. And so really the underlying issue here is the percentage of our population that is struggling with mental illness is huge and underestimated and underreported. And so, again, it falls to the medical community, to the doctors, the OB-GYNs, and to the pediatricians who need to be aware that somebody is struggling and self-medicating if they're in childbearing years. And, so that's why it's so controversial and so complicated, and why for the life of the time that NOFAS, the National Organization for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, or Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, has been in Washington trying to, leverage what information they are able to get. Getting diagnoses is hard. Nobody wants to admit that they drank during pregnancy, or even the amount that they drank during pregnancy. Doctors don't want to ask. Parents, moms and birth moms, they don't want to tell, and it's really, really hard to get credible numbers. Even the statistics aren't particularly credible. But you hear, like in Canada, your statistics there, and they're a lot more available than they are here, and they're 2 to 3 times the number that I hear here in the United States. So, and recently in Italy, numbers just came out, and they were doing studies on the meconium, on the baby's first poop, and being able to find something that proved alcohol exposure. And I'm not quite sure what the study size was, but some horrific number, like 39% of those that were tested had been exposed to alcohol in the last 4 to 5 months of the pregnancy. And I was just blown away by that. 39%.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's not, I mean, there are some cultures, as in Italy, where they do, consume wine with their meals but at 4 to 5 months, the last 4 or 5 months of your pregnancy, you're pregnant. You could be doing damage. And I think that's the real crux of the problem, is that for years people have been told it's okay to have a glass of wine. It's okay to have a beer. It's not okay. It goes directly into that child's brain and pickles it. It's just, It's not okay to have any alcohol.
No, it's not. And you know what? It's not that long a period that one goes without. And like I said, people give up sushi and coffee. But again, I recognize the underlying issue, and it's that people give up what they can give up. And those that can't give it up have a greater reliance on it. And that's what needs to be addressed. And really prevention is it for FASD. There's prevention and providing sustainable programs for adults who are going to live with it, because it doesn't go away. And these adults are young adults and older adults with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder fill the correctional facilities. And I hate to use terms like unrehabilitatable, but in many cases, these are people who don't understand consequence. So if they're in a correctional facility and then they're released, what keeps them from doing the same exact thing again if they don't understand the consequence of their behavior? So the monies that the government and these agencies aren't putting up in the beginning to provide early intervention and prevention and awareness information are being spent on trying to rehabilitate people who don't have learned behavior in the adult years. And it's billions and billions of dollars. So, organizations like NOFAS and organizations in Canada also, we fight this endless battle of trying to get FASD on the DSM-4 so that the medical community recognizes it more, and then the educational community will recognize it more, and then the services will be there. But,
I believe it's supposed, I thought it was supposed to be on the latest version. It's not out yet, the new DSM, but I had heard that the latest one that's going to be published soon, I believe it's 2012 or 2013, will have FASD on.
I know that I signed some kind of document saying please, 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 and everyone I know vied for it. So that's good news, and you're the first one telling me, so I'm thrilled to know that.
I just finished my master's degree, and I'm pretty sure we discussed it in one of my classes, and that they were saying that it was going to be on the next, in the next publication, that it would finally make the list. For our listeners who are not aware, the DSM is the diagnostic manual that clinicians refer to when diagnosing different disorders, and it's kind of like a checklist, and they're all there, and you have this, and this. Oh, well, let's go to this category, and that's, and that might be your diagnosis. So just for people who aren't too familiar with it. But I do believe it's coming.
Well, it's certainly met its time. It's time for it to come. When we were our last few IEP scenarios, the FASD so wasn't holding its weight that one of the clinicians on the team suggested we get an ADHD diagnosis, which wasn't hard. They're all a lot of fetal alcohol spectrum disordered symptoms appear as ADHD, and sometimes they're misdiagnosed. So in any event, we went out and got one of her therapists to give us an assessment, and was able to give us a diagnosis of ADHD. And with the ADHD, we were able to get her services that year. So as a parent with one of these children, or with any child for that matter, no matter how gifted or differently abled they are, it's all a matter of manipulating the information that either empowers you or works against you. I mean, you have to figure out a way, even the stuff that works against you can empower you to get the services for your children.
I do think it is unfortunate, though, in this day and age that we do have to manipulate and cajole. I know my friend has 5 children with different abilities, as you put it so lovely. I like that. And she fights every single day for these children to simply get what they need. If it was a case of, the child's hungry, you need to put a sandwich in front of them, there would be no fight. You would just hand it over. And it's so frustrating to me as a parent of a child with FASD to have to constantly fight. I find it it's extremely frustrating and overwhelming at times.
Well, it's our right as parents to be their best advocate. And again, I wrote an article not too long ago, which it likened my journey on that advocacy route as somebody who didn't know what they were doing and then got my training wheels and then, sort of moved my way on up from there. You don't know what you're doing, but, you don't need a license to parent either. So they send you home with this baby and no instructions, whether or not your child has exposure or whatever they're going to grow up to be. You have no instruction book, and it's the same with advocacy. You don't really know what you're doing. You're sitting in these IEP meetings and you're fighting for your child because you love your child and your child needs services. But I talked about how I fought for an IEP, and we got an IEP, and then a year and a half or 2 years later, we had to bring an attorney into the situation. And the attorney looked at the IEP and said, these are terrible outcomes. Everything's emotional. There's no educational goal here that's heavy enough to really make any difference. And I said, well, I didn't know what I was fighting for. I just wanted an IEP, So we learn through our mistakes, and we learn through our successes, for that matter, as well. In the end, I could have been the best advocate on the face of the earth, and I can't say that I was, but I can say that I love my daughter enough to fight tooth and nail to get her what she needs. But in the end, she was her own best advocate. Our children have to fail upwards to prove that they need the help. It's my developmental editor has this lovely saying. She says, "How many chairs does a child have to throw?" But it wasn't until the liability was at stake for our local school system, and teachers and principals had been kicked in the teeth and in the head, and the kid went AWOL and they couldn't find her for 9 minutes, that she advocated for herself. She got herself an outplacement into a better or a different educational setting that she needed, a more therapeutic educational setting. But up till that point, I could have hired the best advocate and the best educational consultant and the best lawyer, and I thought I did. And it was just being sabotaged left, right, and center. So, and then, that comes down to the whole argument of it really just becomes about funding and who's going to pay for these services for your special kid. And we don't have that kind of money. So let's just make it work in the public school setting. And, then my conversation is really about, well, okay, I want what's best for my kid. Is it least restrictive? Is it most supportive? How are the other kids in the classroom being affected by my daughter when she starts screaming, "I want to die"? What are the other parents going through when their first grader comes home and says, Mommy, what happened at school today? How does that work? And on what side of that controversy am I really on? When I know what living with this child is like, and I know that I'm fighting for her best interest, and I know that our school system is not seeing everything, and I can relate to everyone on all sides. I love that teacher that's having to restrain my kid. I know restraint is a horrific thing you have to do. And in our particular state, restraint was allowed. Now, where we're living now, and our daughter isn't with us right now. She's living with another family that we've had to arrange, which we can talk about a little. But if she were here in the state where we are now, in the state of California, restraint is not allowed. So if she were back into a public school setting or even a therapeutic setting and had a rage and was slamming her head on the wall or was coming after somebody, it would not be legal to restrain her. So
what would they do? What would they do?
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure.
That situation where, if the child's in a rage and you can't control them, like I can't even. Oh, wow.
Well, it's not even about controlling them. It's about keeping them safe.
Protecting them, yes. Protecting
you want to keep them
and others,
safe from hurting themselves and other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question of true understanding of what this condition is really all about. And then, And Ellie, unfortunately, in my daughter's case, the comorbidities are really strong and muddying everything. She was diagnosed mood disordered at about age 4, and at 6 it changed to a full bipolar diagnosis. And at 7, although they'd been kicking it around for years prior to that, we got the reactive attachment disorder diagnosis. And, of course, there was sprinkled in there the ADHD, which really wasn't ADHD. It was a symptom of all the rest of the other stuff, but we used it to get services. But none of the other stuff mattered in terms of getting services. And in the meanwhile, the schools and the agencies, they wanted her in a public school, and she was, so again, we advocate for our kids, but in the end, they're their own best advocate. And it's tragic that they have to fail upwards. I mean, there's a sense of humility that you see in the eyes of your child that they've lost because they can no longer keep it together in that environment after a particular period of time of doing it. And in my daughter's case, it was first grade. I mean, she couldn't hold it together for the full day. And so the rages and the restraint and all the rest of that, increased threefold in under 8 weeks. And so, do I say, when people call me and ask for advice about it, do I say, hire the best attorneys, get the best educational consultants, go in there fighting? Yeah. But the truth is, that didn't work for me. What worked for me was my kid was so needy, she made it clear. Mm-hmm. There was no doubt about it,
You mentioned briefly, Lori, that Ellie is no longer living with you and she's in a guardian family. Could you explain how that works to our listening audience?
Oh, that's called a self-made solution. That was a blessing from God that fell from tears from heaven. When Ellie was at the end of her first grade year, she had been moved into a therapeutic day school not too far from where we lived. It was being paid for by the local public school, and it was not a good environment for her at all. So I'm not even sure where to begin with it, but they didn't take into consideration the reactive attachment disorder, and so when the behavioral stuff started to really increase, they attached to her. And so, one of the things that you learn about when you're trying to find respite in a scenario with a child who has reactive attachment disorder is that you find people who will care for them that understand that they shouldn't try to bond to them, because a child with reactive attachment disorder will bond to a stranger, but not to somebody where any kind of reciprocal intimacy is required. So at school they began to honey baby sweetie cookie her. And so as a result, she was better at school and she was attacking us at home. And so I would go to these meetings and say, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. This isn't a support. This school, this therapeutic environment is not supporting us as a family. This is to our disadvantage. And they kept saying that we had family problems and that we needed more therapy. And what they were trying to do was hold on to the school system's funding. Because,
absolutely.
Our child wasn't the only one from that school, and so they needed to prove they had things under control. And meanwhile, she was doing well on her spelling test, which is great. But but she also spent 11 weeks in the hospital that year, in bouncing in and out of the psych ward, once sent by the people at school, because her modus operandi was to elope. So she was a runner, and she would run with intent into traffic. And she was intentionally expressing suicide. She was talking about wanting to be with her birth mother, who had committed suicide when shortly, like 10 days after her diagnosis, which we never had any closure or clarification or anything like that. It's the timing was just, if anything called irony exists, that was one of those times. And 10 days after the diagnosis, she commits suicide. But so we had all of these, the entire medical community polarized to the fact that this child needed to be in a 24-hour residential treatment center because she was eloping, she was running into traffic, she was trying to hurt herself, she had intention to hurt herself, she hated her family, she threw a sweater over my head one day when I was driving home from therapy at 60 miles an hour. She was very self-destructive and outwardly destructive. But the school said everything was great. And so the school wasn't about to pay for us to send her into an RTC. So we applied for grants. And the grants kept turning us down because they said she didn't have impaired reality. Well, she didn't have impaired reality because she was on a mass of cocktails by that point. And so the psychotropics had her unimpaired, but the only reason she was unimpaired was because we had enough insurance to be able to hospitalize her to get her on those drugs. So it was like a gerbil wheel. We were on a gerbil wheel with a child who was completely self-destructive, and nobody wanted to be the one to say this child needs to be in a 24-hour scenario for a lengthy period of time. So things were just terrible. And our other children were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from all the trauma in the house. And one day towards the end of that semester, that first grade year, I get a call from the school, this school, the therapeutic school that is not doing us any help with anything that's going on in our home, and she's reported me for doing something bad to her, for harming her in some way. And so because the relationship with the people at the school is so not healthy, they believe her over the fact that we're in there for family therapy all the time, and we always talk to them about the fact that she hurts the children and she's the one who comes after us, and when we restrain her, she's biting us and hitting us and kicking us as we're carrying her up to her room to place her on her beanbag chair, her safe space. And so they report us because that's their duty. They have to report. They have a duty to report. So they report us, and Ellie does these things. I mean, she hits her head on the stove, and she slams herself, and she bites herself, and she's very self-destructive. She's covered with bruises on a regular basis. And so I was horrified and in a state of anxiety like I've never had in my life for about 4 days, waiting to find out if they had found us to be somebody who had ever laid a hand on her, which I didn't. Nobody did. Then they would have taken all of our children out of our home, and we would have been investigated. And so that was the overall threat, that here Ellie was in a school where they believed her word over ours, which is fine. I understand that they have a duty to do that, to protect the child. But that here she was trying to destroy us and compromising us as a family when all we were trying to do was help her and get her in the right situation. and still running into traffic, doing all that stuff that she was doing, and we're trying to protect her. And what I realized was I couldn't protect her anymore because now she had started telling people that I was doing things to her, that I was hurting her. And so it became one of those situations where damned if you do, damned if you don't. And so I needed to videotape whenever I was alone with her. I wasn't, I needed to have other people around. And we never told her that we knew she had told that because I thought, well, that will empower her. Okay, Mommy and Daddy are scared. We know that
give her more
fuel.
That.
Yeah. Right. So we didn't. But then about 2 weeks later, Craig was restraining her and taking her upstairs because she had done something. I'm not sure she hit somebody or started to rage against the machine. I don't know what she was doing, but I remember he was carrying her up the stairs, and she was biting him and hitting him and kicking. He was trying to keep her extremities all into the space of being able to hold her to get her upstairs. And she started to yell, you're hurting me, and I'm going to tell on you. I told on you guys before, and blah, 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 and you're not allowed to do this to me. And she started with the verbiage of what they were telling her at school and in therapy. Nobody's allowed to hurt you, blah, blah, blah. And Craig said, we know that you told. We know, and we're not hurting you. We're trying to help you. We're carrying you upstairs. He's explaining all of this to her. But remember, we're explaining this to somebody with traumatic brain injury who has no understanding of of consequence. And, these abstract things don't, they're not spelling tests. Spelling tests are different. So it was a very difficult time in our family as we felt like we were literally disintegrating. And our family was so compromised and the kids were so damaged. And my health was going down the toilet. I had these horrific chest pains, and I had stomach problems, and I was going to see a cardiologist, and it was a mess. And it was all stress and anxiety and fear, and it was awful. And so I had kept a relationship. I'd had a relationship with a woman who was a developmental therapist, a neuro reorg specialist, something that a lot of parents with autistic kids have tried. And I met her shortly after Ellie was diagnosed, and we actually flew her to spend some time with us to create an individualized neuro reorg program for Ellie when she was young. And I took that program with me everywhere. I took it into the schools, the IEP meetings. Please, can you do this at school when she falls apart, when she becomes dysregulated? And they all looked at me like I was crazy. Nobody would do it. And it was time involved. I mean, you had to pull the kid off of the mat and then have them blow a cotton ball through a straw on their belly across the floor for 10 minutes. And then you bring them back to their mat. And so it was unconventional and therefore not accepted by anybody. So I did it as much as I could do it, but then she was already in full-time school and there was no time to do it anymore. So long and short, I called the therapist who also ran a school, and I said, what can we do to get her in your school? And this actually had happened about the year before she'd gotten herself into the therapeutic outplacement school. And so I flew out there and looked at the school, tried to figure out if I felt like we could move out there, really in the hills in Washington State. And there really were no opportunities for either my husband or myself there. So, and it was so far away, and she was so young, and I had all of these emotional issues with, all right, it might be the right school, it might be the right place for her. It was a very impressive place. However, it's logistically, it's just not feasible for us as a family. So fast forward a year to now, I'm sitting on my kitchen stool thinking that DCFS is going to come in and tear my family apart because of pathological lies that my daughter with brain damage is telling. The kids are traumatized, and my heart feels like somebody's got to cut me open and replace it, and everything's a mess. So I reached out to her and I said, is there any chance that there might be someone, would you as the headmaster even consider allowing us to board her at your home so she can attend the school? And that's sort of how this whole thing evolved. she found another parent who has a child who's been pretty successful, very successful in the school, who was also adopted pretty much at birth and has FASD, amongst other comorbidities, and more on the autism scale. So the MI, the mental illness with my daughter, is quite a bit different for this mom. But this mom and dad had also been foster parents to about 150 kids over the course of 10 years. They had 4 of their own kids. They fell from grace. They're an amazing and extraordinary couple, and they've studied attachment therapies, and they were far more expert at the attachment stuff than we ever could have been. And so we began conversations with them about the possibility of Ellie being able to attend school and live with them. And so we supported that, and we put together a plan for a year to try it with an initial couple of months to see if that was going to work out before school even started. It was the summer of 2010. And and we paid them a stipend, and we emptied out whatever we had left in any college funds, because through the course of the years we spent more than half to $750,000, and we're financially strapped at this point. And we've moved for a job opportunity, but our home is in short sale back in Illinois. I mean, financially we were taken to the brink on all of this. And financially, I wouldn't do a thing differently. I wouldn't do anything differently. I would not spend a penny of it that we did. I would have wished for, I guess, more positive outcomes in the end after trying all the therapies, alternative and otherwise. But so she went to spend time with them, and within 3 days, she was calling them Mom and Dad. 3 days.
Yes. So
that's key to reactive attachment disorder, and that was heartbreaking. And so throughout the course of the time with them, that first year, she had a period of a honeymoon. They took her off of all of her meds, which was somewhat shocking to us. She'd been hospitalized 11 weeks that year to get her on a cocktail that sort of works, but nothing ever works for a long period of time. And so there were ups and downs and a roller coaster throughout the course of the year. And the end of the year ended with a bang, and she attacked somebody at school. Somebody got it on videotape. The law and the agencies got involved. We got a phone call. It was a huge bipolar episode she went through. We were told that if we didn't come get her, it would be considered abandonment. So we went to go get her, and we brought her home. It was the first time in a year we had even spoken to her, because they kept her, with the attachment stuff, they kept her pretty distanced from us. And it was a very enlightening experience where both families realized that it was going to take 2 families to raise this child, that it really does take a village. And in Ellie's case, she really needs 4 parents. So she could probably even use 6 parents. But she came back here, and we had no support here because we're in a different place. We're in a different state. And we tried to go back to Illinois, and her doctor dumped the case because it was too high profile, and we couldn't get her hospitalized, and she was a wreck. So my husband brought her back here, and we farmed out our other kids to stay with other people because she was really a mess. And I med-washed her. And because they had started taking her to the state medical, they received state funding to handle her medical, so they stopped using our insurance and started using that. And they did that because we told them, we don't have a lot left in the coffers. So they did it for all good reasons. They didn't do it to keep secrets or anything. But the state never looked at her medical history, so they put her on stuff she should have never been on. And long long and short, she had this huge episode where she attacked somebody for food because she should not have been on the drug class she was on. So it took about 9 days. I med-washed her, and then underneath the med-washing, she was so mentally deteriorated that we were finally able to get her into a hospital here and somewhat stabilized. And by that time, the investigation, she had reported that they were beating her up there at that family, so they were under investigation. I mean, she's kind of a repeated offender in terms of bogus reporting. And, at some point you wonder, when are these agencies going to catch on that this is not, for real, or that this is what the child imagines, this is a child's perception of reality rather than what is, instead of investigating innocent families who are trying to do right by this child, So, that was a whole other experience. And in the long run, we stabilized her. We were able to get her back to Washington. And so and we kind of take it a day at a time at this point. She's in school. The school took her back. The school was shut down because of her scenario that happened in May.
Wow.
It's a mess. But the people who are up there are the most extraordinary people. They are ever forgiving. They are ever accepting. There was never a question whether or not, if the school opened and the child was back in Washington, if the child could attend school again. It was never a question. It was just an assumption. And so she's in school, and she went back to school after the whole trauma of the summer and had forgotten everything she learned the year before. And that was frightening to both the school administrator and to her guardian mom. But there you have that, that lapse of information that one day they knew and the next day they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's also the trauma of Child Protective Services coming to the house and pulling her out. And although she went from them to us in a matter of a day, she went from telling them that I was this horrific person to, Mommy, I've missed you, I love you, at the airport. So, and in front of them, it was just such a clear picture of reactive attachment disorder that, there are so many adults' hearts have been ripped out of their chests and stomped on the ground by this child, But we all understand that, again, it's not premeditated or oppositionally determined. It's not something she's doing on purpose. It's all part of, her organic legacy.
Yeah, it's very difficult for people to understand that it, if you don't understand it, that it is not personal. I find I'm having to, apologize to people and explain to people, like, she doesn't mean to do it. It's all just part of her FASD, and you have to understand. Yeah,
It isn't personal, and yet parenting is very personal. So, here she has 4 parents because we all love her. We all have her best interests at heart. We would all do anything we possibly could for her. We'd all fight for her and advocate for her and do, go to the moon for her. And yet there's this attachment is so superficial. Now, since May, our relationship with the guardian parents has really changed, and I think that May had to happen, that episode had to happen for us to really discover and take the next step on the journey, which really is co-parenting. There have been many articles and a lot of press about our very high-profile scenario. They've used words like relinquished and gave away and unadopted, and it's all crap. They're all words. We are her parents. We have custody. She is our daughter. She is their daughter. She is their daughter because they are the guardians. And they are her legal guardians. We have identified them as her legal guardians. We haven't given anyone away. We haven't thrown anyone away. She isn't a throwaway child. She is a child who is loved by 2 families. It's really no different than a divorce. And yet, the media loves to make this all about the crummy mother in Illinois and how happy she is where she is now. Now she is happy where she is now, and that's a very interesting and beautiful thing for me, to know that she is safe and she's not in a self-destructive environment. And for some reason, that when she's stable, she is having a childhood that I would wish for her with us, with them. And to be able to be the parent to support that, and I provide the support in managing her homeopathically, which is something that I've since pursued because it was an alternative modality that really worked. So I'm now in school to become a homeopath. And I'd like to specialize and have begun with supervision, helping other parents like myself with children like Ellie with those kinds of struggles homeopathically. That I see how my path may have changed. It's that poem about I walk with you, and then there was one set of footprints, or there were two sets of footprints, and now there's one. So in some poetic way, there is justice here, and poetic justice of sorts, because while I'm not the mommy every day, I'm just as much a part of her success right now, I think, as they are. Now, granted, that's not to take anything away from guardian mom and dad, who I revere, and who are extraordinarily patient, amazing people, because they dedicate every day of their life right now to creating a safe space for Ellie to be in and to grow in and to understand her legacy. But like the most recent article that was done in early December, ABC did an update, this mama couldn't kiss it better and that mama can't kiss it better. The episode happened in May, and that was after a year of living with them. She pointed fingers at them just like she pointed fingers at us. She has attachment disorder that can be treated, but that's something that's very, very long term. She has fetal alcohol. That can't be kissed away. And she's bipolar. That's going to be an inconsistent sort of behavioral cycle for the rest of her life. So as parents, we find our role in either advocating or providing support. And for a lot of these kids, I truly believe they need more than two parents. And the sad part is that they're such difficult, challenging children, people just to know and to be with, that many of the moms I know going through this are now single moms. So rather than having four parents, they're one person trying to struggle with it all themselves. And, that's a tragedy. It's truly a tragedy, because these kids don't need less of parents. They need more.
Absolutely. I know it's hard. You can't really tell what might happen, but what is your hope for Ellie? She's still young. Where do you see her in 5 years or 10 years? How do you see her growing up? What is your hope for her?
Well, I guess there's my hope and dream, and then there's, I wouldn't say my expectation, but I would say my tempered, I guess my tempered vision, I'd like to say. So there are two directions that I would talk about, because otherwise I think that I might come off as somebody who, the ultimate optimist rather than the ultimate pessimist, but I want to show both ends. I think it's important to, for honesty's sake, for the truth. My hopes and dreams for her are really being met right now. She's in a family. She has a second chance to be part of a family, which was the most important thing for us when we chose to go the guardian route rather than turning custody over to our state when we ran out of the ability to fund any more support for her. I mean, there's something called custody relinquishment, and many people do it in the United States, and they don't do it out of not loving their child. They do it out of financial duress. They just can no longer support that child's needs financially. And so they give the custody to the state, and then the state turns around and sues the parent, even though the parent has no money. But it's this whole ugly process. And that was really our plan B, other than this wonderful solution from this plan A that fell from the sky when I prayed for it. Plan A was a second chance at a family and not an institution, and being somewhere where someone hugs you when you have a cold and takes care of you and makes you tea and gets you tissues, and not a place that feels sterile and yet is rigid and structured so that you feel comfortable and safe and keeps you from running into traffic. Plan A provides all of that with the comforts of what a functional family views as the ideal living, kind of growing up childhood that you'd want for somebody. And so my hope and dream for that to happen is being fulfilled as I open up the mail and find a picture, holiday card with Ellie and her sibs sitting on a tree with a look on her face that is truly just a happy look, not a fake smile. And I have thousands of pictures. And yes, it's easy to get a picture of a child that doesn't really relay what's going on in the child's life right now. I mean, I know she just went through a period of mania, and I know what's going on, but I look at this picture and I see fulfillment in my hope and dream for her. So if today is just a microcosm of what the next 5 years will be for her, then my hopes and dreams are being met. And I think our guardian family feels the same way because things are quite stable right now. Now, reasonably, I need to talk about the fact that she has bipolar episodes. And with children, the cycling comes much more frequently than with adults. So while an adult might lose it once a year, a child may lose it 15 times in a month. So that cycling and that management, whether it's psychotropic or homeopathic, that's something that, you can never really know how a changing biology, and because she's physiologically growing every day, she's just a little girl. So there's so much growth that needs to happen in the next 5 years. And within that, she has all of this organic dysfunction and the meds and all of these things going on that reasonably one would hope, and my dreams and expectations for her as they relate to all of that, is that we could just maintain enough stability to keep her from the intense episodes that involve agencies and people who just don't get it. Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I think that, her guardian mom, we've talked about long-term, because annually we're kind of renewing this guardian thing every year. But long-term, even, the guardians feel that, there may be the need for a group home or some form of much more rigid, structured, intensified institutional setting for her if the mental illness continues to deteriorate. And that, sometime around 12, 13, 14, when puberty, when functional kids turn into a nightmare. So, driven by hormones. My son is 12 and he's quite functional, and most days I want to run away. So, I think that I'm speaking honestly as a parent, and knowing that when puberty sets in to a child who is a difficult 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, you can't really know where you're going with it. But I know that with the commitment to the co-parenting that we have with our guardian family, and how blessed we are to have that, and how not a minute goes by in my life when I am not thanking the Lord for that relationship and how that's evolved. And I can't say a year ago I would have said that, because there was no relationship a year ago. But because of the path that it's gone, now we really are 4 people all walking the same path for the same purpose. That, you know, we want to provide for her whatever keeps her safe, not destructive, and gives her the best education so that she has a foundation for a future, whatever that future may be. And I guess if there's anything I've learned through it all is that we can want what we want for our children, but it is their journey. And to separate ourselves from being the person who walks alongside of it rather than in the shoes of it is a very challenging, it's a distinction that it takes a while for a parent to do, especially when, you know, that experience begins when you're holding them in your arms and you're swaddling them. So in the beginning, as you're swaddling them, it's truly your responsibility to walk in their shoes. But letting go and watching their direction on their path and knowing it is their path, and removing yourself from that emotional attachment to wanting a particular outcome for them is the greatest struggle, and I think the most rewarding lesson. And, I hope I'll be able to parlay that with my biological kids as well, with my other 2, one who is 6 and one who is 12. And maybe I'll be a better parent as a result of it. So that's I guess, in the end, I just hope that the lessons that are here for me are ones that I can embrace, and I think so far I have, and ones that I can share with others.
Well, I want to thank you, Lori. It's just amazing talking with you and hearing your story, and there are so many parallels with my own life and my stepdaughter. That's a whole other show, I think.
No, it's truly my pleasure. It's my pleasure in any way to provide any insights, because, that's part of my journey. So anything I can help you with, don't hesitate to let me know.
And I've put up your blog address and your address and any communication information on the Blog Talk Radio site where the show will be listed, and it will be downloaded and up for people to listen to within the next few days. Depends on how persnickety my computer is being, as it was this morning.
I can understand that. Yeah, technology is supposed to help us, right?
It's only helpful when it works. When it doesn't work, it's very frustrating. But thank you so much, Lori, and I hope that we can get in touch with each other again and maybe keep our listeners abreast of how things are going with Ellie and how she's progressing as she hits those milestones.
I'd be glad to share in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Lori, for being with us
today. You're welcome. You're welcome. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.